Chapter 6: The Surprise Bookrest and the Dangling Penknife. Perhaps the most remarkable of all the mysterious happenings of this exciting period in the history of Longview Village was what happened to little Jimmy McDougall's invalid chair. Little Jimmy was the only real cripple that the village possessed. When quite a baby, Jimmy had fallen and hurt his back, and from that sad day he had to lie down most of the time. Occasionally he was well enough to sit up, and then he would be placed at the cottage door to watch the other children going by to school or play. Recently the villagers had clubbed together and bought the poor little fellow an invalid chair, having had it sent all the way from Glasgow. Jimmy was delighted, as well he might be, but when the first enthusiasm passed off, he noticed one defect. There was no place to put his beloved books. He was a great reader, and as holding them up made him very tired, he could not read as much as he would have liked. Then came a day when his mother, going to the closet where the chair was kept, came running to Jimmy with the wonderful news that a neat little bookrest had been fixed to the chair during the night. Jimmy's pale little face beamed with joy when he saw it. It was just what he wanted. But who had done it? His mother did not know, nor did anyone else. It was just another mystery. Of course, Roy heard about the affair and talked it over with Oscar and Bruce, but that was as far as it got. Roy did suggest organizing a search, and to this the other two gladly agreed. But when it came to planning details as to where to search and what to search, all three were silent. Roy did quietly suggest the cave, but as Oscar said, it did seem foolish to go to the cave and to find the origin of little Jimmy's bookrest. "Well, I have an idea," said Roy, just as he was about to leave. "Tell me what you think of it." "What is it?" said Oscar. "One question first. Is Rob Malcolm any good at carpentry?" "Well, his father is the only carpenter in the village." "Why?" "Do you think he—" asked Roy slowly. "What a good idea!" shouted Bruce, interrupting. "Splendid!" said Oscar. "Let's go and ask him point blank if he did it." "No," said Roy. "It would be far more fun to catch him red-handed. You leave it to me." "All right, Mr. Detective," laughed Bruce. "When you catch him, mind you blow your whistle and we'll come along with the handcuffs." Then, all laughing heartily, the three separated. The clock spring incident Roy did not mention, nor the footsteps he had seen in the mud outside Dr. McGregor's manse. He felt that these were pieces of evidence of the first importance, not to be idly passed on to village boys, and through them to others, and so perhaps put the person he was looking for on his guard. He had not forgotten, too, the figure he had seen at the cave mouth on his swimming trip some days before. Could he have been deceived? It was possible, of course, but he thought not. But then what reason had he, as Oscar and Bruce had said, to connect the widow's herring, Peter MacDonald's supper, the returned cork jacket, or Miss McKay's peat, old Corky's boat, Dr. McGregor's window, Jimmy's bookrest, and the piece of rusty clock spring with the cave? None at all. Surely it was all foolishness. True, he had a little evidence against Rob Malcolm, But after all, it was only hearsay. He would give it all up, but that was much easier said than done, for his mind had been full of the series of mysteries ever since he had landed in Longview Village. That very night, Roy's diminished enthusiasm was re-aroused to its fullest pitch. The mystic midnight workers actually visited his uncle's store. Mr. Wallace, for weeks back, had lost a penknife which he valued highly as a present from his old friend, and whose loss he had felt keenly at the time. Now he awakened in the morning to find it swinging on a string outside his bedroom window. Roy looked upon the event as bearding the lion in his den, he being the lion, and forthwith made a firm resolve that he would leave no stone unturned till all the mysteries were solved. He did not know how near he was to the desire of his heart. Nothing particular happened the following night, but the one after that someone entered old Miss McIntyre's cottage while she was out attending her sick daughter-in-law in another part of the village. The mystic intruder practically rebuilt the old kitchen table, which, despite its fearful ricketiness, old Mrs. McIntyre had continued to use for many months past, there being no one to mend it for her. As soon as Roy heard the news, he ran down the village street to the scene of this latest happening. Very carefully he examined the renovated table. It was now beautifully steady and strong. Roy noticed that the weak parts had been screwed together, not nailed. Doubtless, he thought, this was to avoid making any noise that might have been heard by neighbors, though the nearest cottage was, he observed, fully 100 yards away. Suddenly he gave an exclamation of surprise. "Why, look," he said, "this middle board isn't screwed on. The holes are made, but feel it's quite loose." "Well, so it is, I declare," cried old Mrs. McIntyre. "Now I wonder why the good angels left that and didn't finish the job." Mrs. McIntyre was a firm believer now, as were most of the villagers, that the angels were behind all these kind deeds. "I know," cried Roy. "Whoever did it was disturbed in his work before he had finished, or else he hadn't enough screws." "Maybe they'll come back and finish the job tonight," suggested Mrs. McIntyre. "Why, yes," cried Roy, getting very excited all of a sudden. "Maybe they will. Say, Mrs. McIntyre, would you mind if I were to come here and watch?" "Of course, boy, if you want to, but if it's angels, you'll not see anything." "But maybe it's human angels," said Roy with a smile. "Anyhow, I'll be here about 10 o'clock and wait up in the sheds in your yard. Then you leave the front door open a little way and bring the table right up to it. So whoever comes will see it at once and be tempted to finish the job. I'll have my flashlight ready to shine on them immediately I hear footsteps." Obtaining his father's permission to stay out late, Roy returned to Mrs. McIntyre's home and hid himself in the shed where he had a clear view of her front door. The door was left ajar and the table made easy of access as arranged. Roy was very excited. His nerves were on the keenest edge, but as the minutes dragged by, his spirits sank a little. Perhaps no one would come after all. He got chilly and creepy, and when 12 o'clock passed, he became very drowsy. Presently his eyes refused to keep open any longer, and his head fell down on his chest as he dropped off into sound slumber. Ah! What was that? Footsteps! Roy started up, rubbed his eyes, and felt wildly for his flashlight, pointing it fully at the doorway where he heard the sounds. He switched on the light. It shone on Mrs. McIntyre. "Where are you, boy?" she cried. "Did you see him?" "No. See who?" gasped Roy. "I don't know. Somebody, though. I heard movements and noises and got up to look, but there wasn't anyone." "But the table!" gasped Roy, running toward it. "Are the missing screws in place?" They were.